California, the modern slave state. California increasingly reflects the characteristics of a modern slave state, one dominated by a single political party that maintains influence through dependency rather than empowerment. The state's sanctuary policies have encouraged a significant influx of undocumented immigrants, many of whom arrive with limited education and economic opportunity. As a result, a growing number of residents have become reliant on government assistance for food, housing, and medical care. This dependency reinforces the ruling party's control, as those dependent on public support are more likely to sustain the political system that provides it. Meanwhile, the working and middle classes, who fund these programs through high taxes, face escalating living costs, stringent regulations, and declining political representation. A common defense of this arrangement is the familiar argument, who will pick the lettuce, be the nanny, or mow the lawn? Yet this reasoning closely parallels the justifications once used to defend Southern slavery. Who will pick the cotton and be your nanny? Both arguments rationalize dependence and inequality as economic necessities, avoiding the deeper question of how such systems limit personal freedom and long-term prosperity. California's current structure has, in effect, created two classes: a governing elite that exercises power through regulation and social programs, and a dependent population that sustains that power through necessity. This system favors control over opportunity and dependency over self-reliance, an arrangement that, in the long term, undermines both individual freedom and civic accountability. Sustaining the slave state. Sustaining a slave state requires money. As the middle class, businesses, and wealthy residents leave California, the state's financial foundation continues to erode. Between 2020 and 2024, California experienced a net domestic migration loss of approximately 1.46 million residents, more people leaving for other states than arriving. This exodus has weakened the tax base, contributing to growing budget deficits and higher taxes. As a result, the state has become increasingly dependent on federal funding to fill the gap. Federal funding to states is closely tied to population. Most federal programs use population-based formulas to determine how much money each state receives. These include major initiatives such as Medicaid, highway and transportation funds, education programs like Title I and IDEA, community development block grants, and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Even modest population changes can shift hundreds of millions of dollars in federal aid. The U.S. Census, conducted every 10 years, provides the foundation for these calculations. The 2020 census established the data that federal agencies use to allocate funding throughout most of the current decade, while annual population estimates help fine-tune those allocations. Nationwide, about $2 trillion in federal funds are distributed each year based on census-derived formulas. Each resident lost can translate to roughly $1,000 to $2,000 less in federal funds per year, depending on the state's mix of programs. For California, continued population decline poses a serious fiscal risk. As more residents relocate to other states, California stands to lose a larger share of federal formula funding in the years ahead. The state also faces potential political consequences, including reduced congressional representation and fewer electoral votes if this trend continues into the next census. In an effort to offset these losses, California's sanctuary state policies have encouraged population replacement through immigration. Because the census counts citizens and non-citizens, including those in the country illegally, this approach helps maintain population totals on paper, but it also increases dependency on state-funded social programs. Reduced congressional representation. California's political landscape remains overwhelmingly Democratic, both in voter registration and in congressional representation. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, as of 2025, approximately 45.3% of registered voters in the state are Democrats, 25.2% are Republicans, and about 22.3% are registered with no party preference or minor parties. This registration advantage has translated into a significant imbalance in federal representation. Of California's 52 seats in the United States House of Representatives, 43, or 83%, are currently held by Democrats, while only 9 or 17% are held by Republicans. California Proposition 50, appearing on the November 2025 ballot, would allow the state legislature to draw new congressional district maps to take effect beginning with the 2026 elections and remain in place through 2030. These maps would temporarily replace those drawn by the Independent California Citizens Redistricting Commission. Analysts at the Public Policy Institute of California project that, under the new maps authorized by Proposition 50, Democrats could gain up to 5 additional congressional seats, potentially increasing their total from 43 to as many as 48 or 92%. The passage of Proposition 50 would therefore further entrench Democratic dominance in California's congressional delegation. While Republicans make up roughly 1/4 of registered voters, their share of congressional seats, currently about 17%, would be reduced to only 8%. Because California is the most populous state in the nation, with the largest congressional delegation, any partisan shift in its representation carries national significance. A gain of several Democratic seats could influence control of the U.S. House of Representatives, while also raising broader concerns about fairness and political balance. Critics argue that the measure undermines the independence of the redistricting process established by California voters, replacing it with a system that's susceptible to partisan manipulation. California law enforcement. Law enforcement in California's modern slave state is not founded on justice or equality. It is built on control. The system's primary purpose is not to protect citizens, but to preserve the dominance of the political and economic elite and the institutions that serve them. Sheriffs, district attorneys, and judges are often drawn from the same political class or are dependent on it for funding and career advancement. Their loyalty lies not with the people, but with those who hold power. As a result, the selective enforcement of laws has become a defining feature of California's justice system. Measures such as Propositions 47 and 57 have weakened penalties for serious crimes, eroded accountability, and created an atmosphere of lawlessness that primarily harms working-class communities. This environment of disorder serves the ruling class by fostering public anxiety. Citizens, fearful for their safety, become increasingly willing to accept the state's justification for expanded surveillance, intrusive policing, and other authoritarian measures presented as public safety reforms. What emerges is a two-tiered system, one where the privileged are insulated from consequence, while ordinary residents are subjected to control, compliance, and fear. California's law enforcement, once envisioned as a protector of rights, now functions as an instrument of political and social dominance, an evolving structure of control disguised as compassion and reform. Summary. California has evolved into a state increasingly defined by dependency, political imbalance, and fiscal instability. A one-party system maintains control through expansive social programs and sanctuary policies that have fostered population replacement rather than sustainable growth. Between 2020 and 2024, the state lost roughly 1.46 million residents through domestic migration, eroding its tax base and heightening reliance on federal funding that is itself tied to population counts. This economic model has deepened social and financial dependence while driving away the very taxpayers who sustain it. Politically, California's dominance by the Democratic Party is reflected in its congressional delegation, where Democrats hold 83% of the seats despite representing less than half of registered voters. The same concentration of power that defines California's politics also extends into its justice system. Law enforcement and the courts function less as independent arbiters of law and more as instruments of control, reinforcing the supremacy of the elite while ensuring that citizens remain compliant through dependency, fear, and selective accountability. While the methods have changed, the underlying structure of control remains strikingly similar. In the South, slavery created a system where one class thrived on the forced dependence of another. In California today, a comparable dynamic has emerged under the guise of compassion and opportunity. Millions of undocumented immigrants provide the cheap labor that sustains key industries and the political power that protects them, yet remain trapped in economic and legal vulnerability. Food, housing, healthcare, and education are supplied not as tools of empowerment, but as instruments of control, ensuring continued dependence on the state and the employers who profit from it. The justification echoes through time. Once it was who will pick the cotton, now it is who will pick the crops, clean the homes, or care for the children. Both systems rely on dependency rather than freedom. Both reward those in power while keeping the laboring class bound, one by chains of iron, the other by policies and promises that ensure they never truly rise. California's transformation from a state of opportunity into one of managed decline and institutional control reflects not only political failure, but a deliberate reordering of society, one that trades freedom for control and self-reliance for subservience.